Good evening, everyone, and as always, you are very welcome to the 8th ordinary meeting of the Literary and Scientific Society at Queen's University Belfast. So, you all always, every single week, manage to surprise me and shatter my expectations of how many of you actually have the free time to show up for these meetings. It astounds me every single week, and thank you all for coming. So, I'll begin as I do every week with any announcements that we have. Our, I want to say, third training session was yesterday. We had a training workshop on teamwork, as presented by Mr. Russell there, who you can see standing there.
Hello.
And as I said, we'll be having the same again in 2 weeks, I believe, same times.
It is, the next one will be on stylistic elements, so sort of finding style and things.
So, if you're someone who wants to become as good as at talking as I am, then I recommend you go to the board. It's also useful for you if you want to take advantage of any of the competitive opportunities in debating we have, which is a nice wee segue for that we have secured extra funding this year for competitions we did not have in previous years, so we can send more than ever to things, and we're currently getting together teams for the Irish Times, which there has been a great level of interest in, so if you want to go to that, make sure you get your name in the door right now. And also we're sending some teams to the InterVarsity at Cork, which is a fun weekend of nothing but discourse on the 23rd, whatever the weekend dates are on that 23rd and 24th of November. So if you're interested in either of those, please do speak to our external convener, Miss Tara Grace Conley. I think that covers most of the announcements, and I wasn't prepared for the chair situation, so we're starting a bit late. Just as always, I'll remind you all that if you want to speak at any of our regular debates, Matthew Bryson, he's there, he's the guy to go to. We have, as we said, the Godkin debate. This house would separate art from artist in a few weeks, which is specifically for first year speakers, and it's full. It's full. Then you can't speak at that. Get off my case. Well, shows how quickly things fill up. So, if you want to speak at anything, get your foot into that door.
I have an announcement.
Mr. Shea Glasgow.
On the last consecutive 2 weeks, I forgot to bring the badges that we sell, and I do apologise because there's been people here looking to buy badges, and promise you that they will be here next year.
Which, is there anyone here wearing a badge? We can look at Mr. Russell there. Lovely, lovely badge. And I'm sure there are several other people wearing them in this room who I have not forgotten about. But that'll wrap up that brief wee bit. So, we do now move on to the reading of last week's minutes, the minutes of last week's debate, which are presented by Mr. Matthew Bradley.
They're not going to be wacky this week, they're just classic minutes! The 7th ordinary meeting of the 170th session of the Queen's University of Belfast Literary and Scientific Society took place on the 1st of November 2018. Co-hosted with QB Archaeology Society, this meeting was attended by 48 members. Opening the meeting, there is my drink. There is my drink. President Hugh Dobbin welcomed our collaborators from Archaeology Society and introduced the evening's guest chairs, Professor Eileen Murphy and Dr. Cormac McSparrow. After a banging set of minutes featuring, to quote the chapters on the week's recording, a sick bass drop, President Dobbin opened a round of private members' business. I'm going to take a sip of water and tell you an anecdote. If my voice sounds a bit weird, it's because last night I bought myself some chicken goujons and they were so hot they burnt the roof off my mouth. So it now hurts to drink. So, private members' business, where were we? Mr. Rowan Wise brought up Philip Hammond's recently announced budget. The reaction from the House was mixed, to say the least. Mr. Wise defended the budget, stating that the government has to be fiscally responsible, whereas Mr. Colin McConnell compared it to polishing a car before it slammed into a brick wall. Mr. Tom McGuinness asked the House's opinion on the election of Jair Bolsonaro as President of Brazil. Mr. Jake Kieran saw his election as one of the saddest examples of polarisation in politics, and Mr. James Orchin stated that we cannot shy away from the fact that every prior election has been won by a pro-communist party, so his election demonstrates a drastic shift. Mr. Mark Gilmore mentioned the supposed accent of a poo from long-running animated sitcom The Simpsons on the grounds of cultural appropriation. Mr. Tom McGuinness pronounced the character's full name correctly and stated that the documentary The Problem with Apu, which many felt had brought about this change, did not call for the character's removal, and that the decision to remove the character was too extreme. Mr. Morgan Hickman, while regarding legitimate criticisms with regards to cultural treatment, stated that the whole basis of The Simpsons is stereotypes, so Apu is treated no differently to any of the other characters. Finally, President Emeritus Calvin Black HLM, after a quick Google, stated that this situation stemmed from a rumour and that nobody involved in the show has made an official comment. What a tremendous waste of everyone's time. Swiggy's questions, it's President's questions! This bit of heart was asked the President whether he would be pre-ordering Super Smash Bros. Ultimate to play as the Piranha Plant. Of course he is pre-ordering Smash Bros. Of course he is. Floral fighter or otherwise. Mr. Michael McConway asked the President his views on Jerry Adams' Negotiators Cookbook. Mr. Shea Glasgow asked if Hugh was a disgraced Garda Commissioner, whether he would take a job at the UN. The answers to these questions shall be lost to time. President Emeritus Calvin Black HLM asked a serious question about society, and while that is what that segment is generally meant for, I prefer melting funny things about Hugh's love of Smash Brothers or his hatred of TikTok. Speaking of Hugh's hatred of TikTok, Mr. Tom McGuinness asked the President what exactly TikTok is. Mr. Dobbin decried the recently rebranded musical.ly as a pure dodge fest, expressing equal disdain towards its users, who have supposedly been applying it in the most creepy ways. Then, somebody asked the question, and no, I'm not going to minute it. You know what it is. You know full well it's not getting minuted. Them's the rules in it, so just deal with it. Good. Well, that's... President Dobbin then introduced the Light's motion. This House believes Remains have no rights. A vote of prior opinion was taken on the motion, which read 9 ayes, 14 nays, and 12 abstentions. After this, the House was treated to an opening address from Dr. Corbett McSparrow, before Professor Eileen Murphy introduced the first speaker for the proposition. Leading the speaker, Mr. Robert Barrett opened for the proposition, who began by explaining many historical attitudes to burial and the treatment of bodies. Defining rights as a cultural construct, Mr. Barrett stated that if we give rights to remains, we are imposing our view on the past. Mr. Barrett also questioned how we can apply our beliefs to ancient history when we have no understanding of their culture, and claimed that to give remains rights is to disrespect the past. Opening for the opposition was the definitely not a maiden speaker, Mr. Malcolm McSparrow, who began by greeting everyone in the room. What a polite boy. Mr. McSparrow claimed that we should respect the wishes of the dead, including those fairly recently deceased. Questioning the morality of exhibiting remains to be gawked at, Mr. McSparrow raised doubts over the merit of displaying remains in museums, questioning whether anyone had been inspired to study archaeology by seeing them. This statement would later come back to haunt him. Continuing for the proposition in his first speech to the Society, Mr. Lee Harrison stated that giving rights to remains would disrupt the work of archaeologists, which could cause a chain reaction, resulting in a decrease in the understanding of history. Mr. Harrison stated that the display of bodies in museums satisfies a morbid curiosity that has, contrary to the claims of the opposition, inspired many to study archaeology. Mr. Harrison concludes his speech by reminding the House that time will take us and we'll end up in the dirt, and that the study of remains gives a legacy to those who have perished. Mr. Michael McConway spoke second for the opposition, who stated that the bioarchaeological desire to protect remains can be reconciled with a right to reburial, possibly sacred ground, should the culture of the deceased have demanded it. Noting that remains have the right to give and withdraw consent to organ and tissue donation while still alive, Mr. McConway noted the ethical importance of the last wishes of the dead and implored the House to vote for the opposition, lest their bones be disturbed by a posthumous hologram of Time Team presenter Sir Tony Robinson. Yeah, he got a knighthood. Right there? Yeah, Baldrick's got a knighthood. Closing for the proposition was Miss Lauren Halstead. In her maiden speech to the Society, Miss Halstead raised the question of when you stop being human, examining the ethics of what it means to be a person. Miss Halstead claimed that archaeologists do respect remains and questioned whether shock at the treatment of bodies is on behalf of the corpse or a reflection of modern sensibilities. Highlighting the futility of discerning the wishes of someone who is long dead, Miss Halstead claimed that by looking at the remains of an actual person, you can glean a better understanding of their life than from the writings of a historian. Another main speaker, Mr. Mark Gilmore, closed the opposition, posing the conundrum, spooky, scary skeletons may send shivers down your spine, but does that mean they don't have rights? Mr. Gilmore highlighted a paradox in the proposition's argument, stating that if you treat Remains with respect, that action provides them with rights. Clarifying that the opposition were not opposed to the study of Remains, Mr. Gilmore asked the House to consider the implications for the future and whether we believe future generations ought to be held to a higher standard than us. Questions were heard from Mr. Shea Glasgow, Ms. Lauren Carter O'Neill, Mr. Colin McArdle, and Mr. James Orchard. After some closing remarks from our second guest chair, Professor Eileen Murphy, a binding vote on speakerability was taken on the motion, which read 23 ayes, 13 nays, and 12 abstentions. Did you hear that, by the way? Okay.
Yeah.
Resulting in a conclusive win for the proposition. May I take the minutes as read?
Aye.
Thanks.
Oakley dokley. Before I move on, I'm going to make a public call out to anyone who's standing in the connecting area between the outside and the room. Every time that the room is overcrowded, there's people standing in here, and there is ample space in the room about to stand somewhere. There is no need to isolate yourselves any longer, as has been done in previous weeks. So, now it is time, as it always is, to move on to a rousing round of private members' business. That is the part of the show where, if anyone has anything in current events they wish to talk about, you may raise your hands and speak your piece. Does anyone in the room have any such piece to speak? Mr. Holmes.
Okay, so I'd be fairly certain that a lot of people in the House tonight are aware of the abhorrent video that was recently uploaded to social media depicting a crude cardboard effigy of Grenfell Tower on a bonfire amidst a background of adults toiling and laughter and making a mockery of the tragedy. And while I have faith that the House would join me in unanimous condemnation of this disgusting video, I would like to know if they believe that the arrests made in connection to the video, police raids and further community condemnations had a solid legal justifiable basis, especially in regards to the contemporary issue of freedom of speech and stuff like that.
Anyone in the room have any thoughts to give on this? Come on, put your thinking caps on, folks. Mr. Glasgow.
From a really dry legal perspective, I'm pretty sure you could get them for a public order offence because it's the kind of thing that would create sort of discontent and disorder in public. So, yeah, you could charge them with that.
Okay. I'll move on. If there are any separate pieces of private members' business. Mr. White.
It is with considerable concern, Mr. President, that I have to say to the House that Fianna Fáil, the political party from the Republic of Ireland, was recently announced that they will be running candidates in Northern Ireland. I wonder if the House agrees with me that this threatens the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom and undermines the British Constitution.
You put your hand up now. Yes, I can tell. Many people have strong thoughts. But you know what? I'm going to go to Mr. Nairn first, because he doesn't have a chair.
Thank you. I had your chair, but I could thankfully abandon it for you.
Thankfully.
The circumstance here is, to begin with, the situation which I actually posted to this referendum to begin with, I was slightly mistaken in my initial posting. It turns out that the individual who announced herself as running for Fianna Fáil did so without the consent or without consulting the party itself. So that led to a bit of a crisis within it. But the more relevant discussion here is the concept of southern political parties running up. And I think this notion that political parties who would consider themselves Irish having no right to run within this jurisdiction is an absurd one. Northern Ireland is a particularly special jurisdiction in that it is a sort of joint situation in which two sides have a very, very distinct view of how the country should be run. To suggest that it undermines the British Constitution to have Fianna Fáil, or indeed Sinn Féin, or anyone who considered themselves to be a nationalist running within this jurisdiction is absurd. It is more an undermining of the Good Friday Agreement and any notion of joint government to suggest that these parties have no right. These people have a perfect right to attempt to sway political discussion in regards to how they view the country.
Mr. McArdle.
Just to echo what Russell said there in terms of Northern Ireland is an incredibly unique part of the United Kingdom in that it it was born out of compromise and difference to the mainland UK. Also, on the point of a constitution, the UK doesn't have a constitution. It's meant to be parliament and things like that. Just on the point of like political parties in the south having a say in affairs up here, unionism itself was born out of unionism in terms of meaning of the United Kingdom as an island as a whole. So I think Ireland as a whole, as a country, an independent state, there should be cross-party development across the border, and if that includes unionism, that's where it was founded from, that's where it came from in the first place.
I'll move on now to Mr. Kieran. Sorry, I always overlook you because you're
Just so passe.
I'll never.
Never mind. Anyway, I don't think this is a particularly new development. It's just a new development for Fianna Fáil. They've been talking about this for years. And as Sinn Féin is already a party run out of the south, whose leader is always a southerner, and as the Green Party over here is more closely affiliated with the Green Party in the south than it would be with the UK party, and People Before Profit is also based out of the south, this isn't really a new development. It's just arguably a new serious political entity trying to enter it. Because People Before Profit is a fringe party, same with the Greens, though to a lesser extent. So seeing a large party that is the main opposition party in the south is interesting, especially as in Northern Ireland we have a stalemate and the potential of another large entity becoming prevalent in our politics. Honestly, at this point, I think it could only be a positive development.
Mr. Hopper. What was it? Fortune. Okay. Apologies.
I basically echo what the other speakers have said so far. I just know this isn't the first time that the councillor out in Tyrone that Fianna Fáil attempted or have gained some form of representation up here. I think about 10 years ago, Sinn Féin MLA officially back then, and they also had a councillor, the next was Julius down in Fermanagh. So I think really the story out here really is this is just another supposed attempt by people trying to get in policy here, but then running local elections has been used for like a decade. They don't really making much ground up here in regards to that.
I'll move on if there are any separate pieces of private members' business. Mr. Glasgow.
So there was an economist report that came out there that said the only positive economic outcome for Northern Ireland in terms of Brexit was to join the United Ireland. I think the only argument that unionism could persuade nationalists with is an economic one, that we're better off in the UK, and this report that came out last week has essentially refuted that. So I'd like to ask the House, is unionism on its last legs?
There's that. You could talk about that every week, you'd never run out of things. It's, as I've said many times, you put him and Donald Trump just on a bingo sheet.
Yeah, we did do that, yes.
No, yeah, we did do that, that's the literal. Mr. Patton.
While I do believe that's the only way you're going to convince a nationalist to believe that union is now going to, unfortunately, unionism is solely tied to identity. It is something more that you're born in than you're stayed in. I may be the exception to that, but it is still true for the majority. At the end of the day, I know families who will join the union because their grandfather did, because their grandfather did. At the end of the day, it's not something rational.
Mr. Mann.
I suppose I would echo that in terms of it's a sad state of affairs, but it is the case that it's both unionism and nationalism, I think, for a lot of people. It's something very closely tied to their identity, what you were born into. And if you think just even among friends, family, people you know, like I can count in one hand the number of people who were born into one literary tradition and have very, very firm change them and they decide to pursue a different constitutional outcome. And I think that that's not going to change until the leadership on both sides start actually trying to engage and work with people who disagree with them rather than just trying to fire off people who to go against an opposing side.
Mr. McArdle.
I think just to echo what the gentleman said, whether it's entirely tied to ideology, and it is probably correct that United Ireland will to protect ourselves against Brexit. But Leo Bragg would be sitting in Dundalk handing out €100 notes, and it still wouldn't make people, identity is so important. Here's what you cling to. And as the economy actually suffers, people revert to those extremes. They revert to their own sense of identity. protect themselves, and they give themselves a sense of meaning in society being to break down. So sadly, I think, while it may be the case, it won't make any difference. It's all ideology here.
Yeah, your name for the minute.
Colin McLeod. Just like to sort of address the issue of the economic question. Coming from background, it can be more than just identity, because, as we know, you may be born into that identity and use a phrase across the room, as a number of people have. But I know people who are my age, versus you, who, in light of Brexit, from very loyalist areas, these are men, now men, in bands, and in the aftermath of Brexit, they said, yes, I think United Ireland might be better, because President asked why, and they said economics. So it is a consideration, and it isn't just down to identity.
Mr. Kieran?
One thing that's interesting is that Brexit has placed us in this position where we're having to reevaluate our values both as nationalists and as unionists. It's no longer an identitarian thing. As someone from a fairly mixed background, one thing I'm finding really interesting is whether or not it all depends on how good the deal comes out. It doesn't look good at the moment, but who knows? This is a thoroughly unknown entity. If we could get something amazing, totally by accident, I doubt it personally, but hey. So effectively, it depends on whether this deal works. And currently, I'm wondering whether, if there were a border protocol in the event of a hard border, and nationalism didn't win, would that mean the end of nationalism? Because this is the first time unionists have been really shaken in their faith.
If there is any other separate pieces anyone desperately wants to bring up, raise your hand now, or not, we'll move on swiftly. We will move on swiftly. So, it is now time for everyone's favourite bit, obviously, the President's Questions. This is where, as I said, if for whatever reason anyone thinks I have anything interesting to say, you may ask me a question about such now. Mr. Nairn.
Mr. President,
What?
given the general theming of tonight's debate, if you were to pick any member of the Litterific, past or otherwise, to run away with in some sort of illicit romantic elopement, who would it be and why?
It's his smile. I can't. It brightens up my day every time so much. So it's if the theatrics have appropriately answered your question, then I hope that is satisfactory to the House.
I'm very satisfied.
And so would I be. Any other questions for me? Mr. McArdle.
Mr. President, with your counterpart in the United States not be too happy to take questions, would you take it upon yourself to remove a member if they're asking questions you didn't like?
See, you'll never ask me questions I don't like because everyone's so shouldn't like. Do you have a point on this or what?
I have a question you wouldn't like.
Okay, let's test the theory then. I mean, unforeseen circumstances, this is unprecedented. Please go ahead, Mr. Glasgow.
Why aren't you wearing a poppy?
Get out.
Constitutionally, you can't make it, so it's moot.
Constitutionally, can I?
You can't make them.
Do what you want.
No, suspend the claim.
Can I
Find him over and over
Can I not remove people if they say things that contravene public order, which he has done in the
You have
past?
to call a vote on it.
Hold on. Right, we are now taking a vote. Which, I'm dodging your question, obviously. But we are taking a vote on this House believes Mr. Shay Patrick Glasgow ought to be removed from the chamber.
Point of order. Which part of the Constitution are you relying upon?
Which part of the Constitution am I relying upon, Matthew?
Don't put this on me! I'm not gonna lie. Oh, sorry, well, I've got it up here, but it's really, like, this is a big constitution. Do you want me to just, actually, here's an idea. Settle down. Here's an idea. How about everyone sits in silence while I look through the constitution to find this rule, and then we can take the vote.
No, we're taking the vote now.
Point of order.
No.
You need a seconder.
Second.
Point of order. Name of the seconder for the minutes.
This is barracking. So, if you would wish to vote in favour on the motion, this House believes Mr. Glasgow ought to be swiftly ejected from the chamber, please do raise your hand and say aye.
On that point, point of order on the point of order.
14, 16. And if you would wish to vote in favour of the opposition and we do not eject him swiftly, please raise your hand and say nay. Nay. And if you would wish to vote abstaining, please raise your hand and say nay. I'm breaking all the rules. Discretion goes as far as I say it does. So, if I remember what you said correctly, the vote was what? I can read it out. Do you want?
I've written it down.
Go for it, man. No worries.
Okay. On the motion, this House believes Mr. Shay Patrick Glasgow will be removed from the Senate room, which was seconded by Mr. Russell Lane. Yes, I did put that in the minutes. There were 16 ayes, 27 nays, and 7 abstentions.
So, the nays have it. Mr. Glasgow maintains his space.
On a minor point of order, just so you know for future use, you do also have the authority to entirely at your discretion suspend a member for a period of up to 2 weeks.
Point of order, Mr. President.
30 seconds if you want to.
Point of order, Mr. President.
No.
Point of order.
What?
You can, yes, at your discretion, but only if they have undoubtedly broken the rules set forth in the Constitution. Something which Mr. Lang must have seen to be able to quote that. Only to further his own biased agenda.
I am a chaos spirit.
Yeah.
Well, this is certainly more reading of our Constitution than I've ever done. So, well, he maintains his space for now, and I'm sure we are all very happy about that. Should there be a rule that allows me to suspend people for 2 weeks if I perceive them as breaking the rules? Probably not. You would be very upset if there was a leader much less benevolent than I. So, after that rather raucous session, if there are any other President's questions, I will take them, but otherwise we can move swiftly on. Miss Dobbin.
It's fine, I can't reach the phone here. I was in your house this evening. He is my brother. And I was just wondering if you could relay what we watched on TV. Quality programming
Right. If there's any respect for me left, but I know which one you're talking about, so I'm not going to list any other shows. I did watch the US Office, but no, I'm sure the show to which Mary Kate was referring was that we enjoyed an episode or two of the Netflix original series, The Boss Baby, back in I can assure you, which I was watching purely for ironic purposes. I wouldn't honestly recommend giving it a watch, but you know,
It's so cursed.
he knows. He is.
I found it.
Russell Nairn has a PhD in Boss Baby lore. It is incredibly deep. You've got like the Elder Scrolls, Lord of the Rings, Boss Baby. That's the hierarchy. And with that, I'm going to bring a swift end to the President's questions for the evening. That was quite a show. So, it is now time to move on to the prior opinion vote before we start the main debate. So, this is how you felt about this motion as you walked in here today. So, if on your prior opinion you believe that sex positivity has gone too far and you would vote with the proposition, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 There's a lot of people on our side of
Seven. And if you would vote with the opposition, please raise your hand and say nay. Nay. And if you would wish to vote abstaining, please raise your hand and say no. Right. Mr. Bradley, please read me back the prior opinion vote.
There were 7 ayes, 43 nays, and 20 abstentions.
So, quite decisively, the nays have it. So, now that the prior opinion vote is wrapped up, it's time to move on to the substantive business of the evening, which is what I'm sure you're all looking forward to. So, it's time to find out why we are all so young, dumb, and full of curiosity about these And it is with great pleasure that on the motion, this House believes sex positivity has gone too far. Welcome the first speaker for the proposition, Mr. Ryan Navy.
Good evening, honourable members of the House in their various incarnations of being. And tonight we propose a motion, thus the House believes that sex positivity has gone too far. Now, as the first speaker of the proposition, it's incumbent on me to define what we mean by this. So, to that end, I'll define it as the following. So, sex positivity is the proliferation of sexualized content and ideas where all sexual activity with consent is considered to be fundamentally healthy and pleasurable. Now, with regard to going too far, we will identify this as being instances where this movement leads to unhealthy, unpleasurable, or otherwise negative outcomes with unaccounted for ramifications and consequences. And finally, with regards to the response we should take to these things, I want to emphasize and stipulate that the correction of sex positivity gone too far is not to implement sexual negativity. Rather, the implementation of standards based on intellectually honest analysis of the risks and the consequences. So, if you'll permit me to begin with an anecdote. Before we get into the meat of the matter, this topic of hypersexualization first came to my mind when visiting my brother back in Tyrone. So, I knocked and entered the house, announcing myself, as I normally do, and on entering the living room, I spotted a famous pop star of some description in 1990 with a sadly sing on sex doll, who was one of them, and couldn't quite help but remark upon her not inconsiderably sized hole squishing down the TV screen in front of my rather very impressionable one-year-old nephew. Now, you may be forgiven for thinking, why on earth would my brother allow this child to see such stuff on TV on a superhouse? And I thought so really, but to my brother's credit, I don't believe anyone really expected the equivalent of softcore porn to be regularly scheduled programming on this Disney channel. Now, with regards to the saturation of sexualized content in media and marketing, my fellow speakers of the proposition will go into more detail regarding that. However, I ask you to consider the risk as we go on and progress through this debate. In particular to vulnerable young girls and boys, where this media is influencing not only how they view each other, but also themselves, and the pervasive developmental consequences that haven't yet been considered. So, getting to the thrust of my speech, this glorification of sex by a sex positivity movement has resulted in a culture where we're not willing to be honest about the risks of what we're promoting, as doing so would be lambasted as some sort of sexual shame. And this is very dangerous, this polarisation, and a lack of nuance, as these risks can be quite severe. For instance, take BDSM or any dominant submissive type kink relationship. So the part of the dynamics at play in such a relationship could very well turn toxic, where the submissive could be groomed and bullied into giving consent in order to fulfill the sexual needs of the dominant. Now that's not to say that's necessarily representative of all these relationships. Nevertheless, it's a risk that, on attempting to discuss, often leads to being branded as kink shaming. The point here remains that forced consent, much like forced confession, is not remotely valid. Yet, the mere presence of consent, coupled with the lack of scrutiny and thus understanding of these relationships, results in these toxic dynamics being acceptable, or at least ignored, under the sex positivity movement. The evidence of this can be plainly seen in media, such as 50 Shades of Grey. By all accounts, an abusive relationship controlled by a sexual psychopath and presented as a desirable circumstance. So what do we do? What do we take from that? That this is normal? And if that is normal, what's the consequences of not finding this enjoyable? That you're abnormal, or that your experience is bad because you're not trying hard enough? I believe that sex positivity needs to take its foot off the gas here and allow for our understanding and research to catch up before endorsing these complex relationships wholesale with a blank check. Another point to consider is the unholy alliance between sex positivity movement and our current culture of instant gratification. I put it to the House that the hollow promiscuity enabled by apps such as Tinder, which is essentially a just eat service for sex, encourages the objectification of human beings on solely superficial grounds. The foreplay, the courting, the relationship element have been completely removed, and instead...
I said I wasn't going to do this, but I'd like to point out my wonderful boyfriend who I met on Tinder, and we've been very healthy and happy relationship for over a year. And I'd like to suggest...
So, with regard... Yes, I get it, yes. Your point. So, yes, sure, that can happen, most certainly.
Yeah.
But it's not really the most common outcome, is it? The most common outcome is you go there, you do what you need to do, and you cut off. At any rate, what else? Yes. So the whole experience is boiled down to its cardinal end result. Now, I know that the death of romance sounds an awful lot like old man yells at cloud, but we really must consider, right, that this psychopathic approach to sex is something we really want to encourage. Now, I'm happy for people to engage in sexual activity and explore that aspect of themselves, but we mustn't lose sight of one important need in pursuit of another. We need relationships, proper relationships. We can't continue to boil down our experience to merely sensual pleasure at the cost of meaning. Think of it this way: how can you enjoy something every day and still have it mean something? How can the objects you use to achieve that goal mean anything to you, if they're simply a means to an end to be discarded? This is not healthy, and I challenge you to consider if this is really, truly pleasurable. I would argue you would receive the same pleasure from that as you would from abusing a substance. Imagine if sex positivity movement was actually an alcohol positivity movement, for instance, right? You'll start to see what I mean then. My fellow members of the proposition will go into more detail regarding sexual addiction and the dangers presented by a gung-ho sex positivity culture that is ignorant of the risks. But I want to impress upon you that the psychopathic approach to sex and pleasure, where it's common for just because we have sex doesn't mean I care about you, is stunting our social growth and is a factor that is completely ignored by short-sighted sex positivity. So I hope you will think hard on what I've discussed and what the proposition will present to you tonight as it goes on, and appreciate just because something is positive in its approach doesn't mean it's all good. Let's agree to rein back the sex positivity a bit and introduce some people positivity and sensibility. Thank you very much.
Now, there's a wee bit of muttering going on during that speech, alright, some chatting, so it's just ask that whenever people are speaking we give them the courtesy and don't try and talk over anything. So, now, pleased to welcome speaking first for the opposition, Miss Jessica Nave-Smith.
I forgot my phone. We'll start to the evening, folks. It helps I could work half an hour here.
Okay, speakers of the proposition, fellow speakers of the opposition, and honourable members of the House. I think it's important that we continue this debate with a few words from everyone's favourite American trio, Salt and Pepper. Let's talk about sex, baby. That was a terrible joke for everyone involved, including myself. But I think it's important that we look at, as the song suggests, sex is actually a topic that we should be talking about. This is exactly what sex positivity is about. What the motion says, has sex positivity gone too far? Absolutely not. If anything, sex positivity hasn't even scratched the surface. I think, or we think at the opposition, that it needs to go even further. So as the opening speaker for the opposition tonight, I'm going to address what sex positivity can be defined as, and what it actually entails, and why sex positivity is paramount to sex education, especially in this country. We all know how really bad the sex education is, and I'll not try and put you through that too much. But yes, my fellow speakers, Olivia and Leanne, are going to be honing in on topics such as LGBTQ+ and consent, and then Leanne's going to be talking more about positivity and orgasms to finish us off. And I'll stop with the jokes, I'm really sorry. But basically we're going to talk about how these all link in and how we actually should be taking care of it. So sex positivity is where people learn to embrace their sexuality, whether you're pansexual, bisexual, heterosexual, and being comfortable with how people actually express themselves sexually. So it breaks down a lot of societal expectations and beliefs of sex that people may have. So as we all know, there is no one way to have sex. And so in turn, sex positivity is actually saying there's no right way of having sex, you can have sex whatever way you want. It's under the rainbow here. And so, yeah, it relieves the pressure and the worries of doing sex right by promoting people to be comfortable in how they have sex, who they have sex with, and how often they have sex without judgment from others. But, we have to sort of put out there as well that sex positivity enforces that the act should be through safe and consensual means in a safe space. So no one should have to be pressured to act upon sex in any way if it makes them uncomfortable. And you know what, it's not sex positive if you're not enjoying it and you don't want to do it, basically. So sex positivity for all these reasons actually needs to go a lot further. So particularly in educating young people in Northern Ireland. So it educates, sex positivity itself educates on the way that safe sex can be enjoyed, how to speak to your partners, or partner, or how many partners you want, about your views of sex and your preferences, contraception, and so on and so forth. But the sex education provided in this country just isn't good enough, and it doesn't reflect this at all. So rather than focusing on topics such as consent or sexuality, which my team is going to look at further down the line, or healthy relationships or contraceptive, sex education is purely focused on abstinence or faith-based teachings. So teaching. Go ahead.
I myself went to a Catholic all-girls school that used to be run by nuns. In my sex education, I was taught about consent, I was taught about contraceptives, I was taught about everything that you're talking about. So to say that it's purely based on faith teaching is complete nonsense.
Well, that's okay, that's fine, but it depends on what school you went to. Like some schools might not mention it at all, or they might not, or they might encourage you not to go down that particular line. So yes, from this I'm saying that people can feel difficulty and a bit of embarrassment in asking about a lot of topics surrounding sex. So much of sex education sometimes doesn't even go beyond the basic biology of the human body and sex. So if it's being taught in schools where a faith doesn't believe in abortion or contraception, sometimes it just won't be covered in the curriculum. And I think it's just abysmal that such information is being withheld from some people, from young people as well. Even if you don't take that option or any options like that when you go through it when you're older, I think it's so important that we still have that information in our societies. So abstinence-based teaching in place of education on contraception is still very common. So generally waiting until marriage or not having sex at all can still be encouraged in our society today. But because lessons about contraception is completely disregarded, young people feel a complete embarrassment when it comes to buying condoms, anything related to contraception, and this can contribute to unplanned pregnancies and STIs. Even though they are decreasing as we go through society, it still means that they're still prevalent in our society today, so it's still there.
So yeah, none of this is an example, of course, of sex positively going too far. I think the proposition would absolutely agree with everything you just said. We define emotion as too far, actually as I have defined it, when it is unhealthy, when it is unpleasurable. And to that I would say, okay, how do you define what is safe?
Well, that is a good point. So it is definitely using, obviously, your contraception and obviously doing it in your safe spaces and making sure it is through consent as well. So that is still good. But that is good. So basically, if they're not being educated in schools, they are going to the internet. And on the internet is where they're being exposed to pornography. And it can often be the most easiest and accessible pornography. So it becomes their main source of education, and some, but not all of it, can give unrealistic expectations of sex, be thoughts and body types, and it can go that far basically, and they're learning things from it, like such as unrealistic expectations of sex, which can affect people both mentally and physically, to the point where people might not even consider using contraception to have sex, or could be at risk of unplanned pregnancy, STIs, and bodily injuries. So in particular, in education, sex positivity in education can help with educating people on how to have sex in safe ways and emphasising more consent. So to wrap up, we said it needs to be pushed further if we're going to create a society and an education system which doesn't view it as taboo, and we treat it as a natural act that's simply a part of life. It can pave the way for better education in our schools and our society by dealing with the complex issues we have surrounding sex today. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the debate and you vote for opposition. Thanks.
If I could please ask for another round of applause for what was Miss Nev Smith's maiden speech. Oakley dokley. I welcome up speaking second now for the proposition, Miss Becca McMinn.
Hello. So I'm here to further the argument by leading the proposition believes that sex positivity has gone too far. Brian, our first speaker, talked about the proliferation of sexual content and ideas and might be effects of modern culture. And in my speech, I will respond to these ideas and arguments. First, though, a point of rebuttal for first proposition. You said that sex positivity relieves the pressures of doing sex right. It alleviates this pressure and focuses on freedom of choice. Rather than alleviating the pressure, we believe that sex positive movement creates a new kind of pressure creates a new pressure, a new cultural norm that's about this pressure to want to have sex a lot of the time.
people, especially women, who aren't necessarily interested in or partake in this culture of being very sexually active, are often branded within sex positivity as prudes, and that's not very intrusive. It carries a lot of negative connotations. For example, in a sex positive society, if we see being more sexually liberated and active, have a more empowered stance, do we then equate people who don't want to participate in this whole sex positive culture, prudes that are often viewed as being, disenfranchised or suppressed in some way? One thing I'm sure the opposition will bring up at some point is like a feminist aspect to sex positive movement. That these positive outlooks on sex, which sex positivity promotes, would have an unmet benefit for women who are more traditionally shamed for sexual activity. And to that we would say, when these ideologies overlap, it is possible to equate feminism with the sex positivity culture of being sexually active. And that, rather than making a positive impact, just replaces old pressures and standards with new ones and positive. We've already mentioned the inclusion of sex in popular culture. Ryan was talking about Matthew and things like that. But another point that we'd like to argue is that we believe sex positivity has gone too far because it has been kind of co-opted almost by the media and advertising as a way to sell things to us. It's a well-known old adage that sex sells, and while that might sound a little cliche, it is true. The inclusion of sex in ads for things like razor, perfume, clothes, take sex positivity's good ideals of healthy attitudes towards sex, and sort of hijacks them to create this sex positive lifestyle that we're supposed to aspire to. And of course, in order to get that lifestyle, you gotta spend money. Because of course, if we're going to be having a lot of sex, we're kind of sold that you're going to need to buy things like nice underwear, new clothes, washing, shaving, etc., etc. The list goes on of things we're sold as related to sex under the guise of sex positivity, and we believe that that has gone too far. In general, sex positivity is not without its faults. It ignores a lot of the kind of nuance around the concept of sex. It can be quite Western-centric, often ignoring culture, traditions, faith and their own views regarding sex. It's individualistic, ignoring those who mightn't have any interest in sex. Some examples are asexual people, etc., who you're just going to tell us more about in her speech. Or people with traumatic experiences regarding sex. They're often alienated by this kind of pervasiveness of sex positivity in culture, like popular culture. Even the very language, like sex positive, implies that sex is this uncomplicated thing that's always positive and good. That, like you said, all consensual activities are fundamentally pleasurable. Because sex is great, and it should be. But even within consensual circumstances, sometimes it's not. It can be weird and awkward. And having these less than perfect experiences is okay and normal. Something which we, the proposition, feel that sex positivity often fails to acknowledge. The pressure created to have such an ultra-positive outlook on sex and make these experiences more complicated than they need to be, and has this gone too far. Have any questions? So, for those reasons, I would urge the House to vote for the proposition.
Again, please get another round of applause for Ms. McMinn's maiden speech. And continuing the case for the opposition, please welcome up Miss Olivia Montgomery.
Okay, so when I was preparing for the speech, I was really inspired by our secretary's really joyous flump throwing a few weeks ago. I thought it would be a really good idea to make it for condoms and dental dams, but I decided at the last minute not. I'm pretty grateful for that, but I'm really glad that joke landed, by the way. Just a quick couple of points to rebuttal. The whole point of sex positivity is about creating an open dialogue on sex. and understanding that for some people it's not enjoyable, and that's okay. Like, sex positivity isn't promoting sex all the time now, constantly, multiple partners. It's about finding what's right for you in your relationship with sex. So that can be for asexual people who don't desire to have sex. That's completely fine. They're a welcome part in the sex positive community. It's also for a lot of people who don't find penetrative sex pleasurable. We need to talk about this more. We need to talk about how there are other means of pleasure than the classical means with regards to sex. And they are a big part of sex positivity. We can't overlook this. Sex positivity inherently is about communication, an open dialogue, safe sex through contraception, safe spaces, talking to your partner, and just doing what you enjoy. And whether that means with sleeping with multiple partners, of whatever gender, if that's what makes you happy, then we shouldn't be judging people for doing that. If you don't want to be having sex, sex positivity wouldn't also be judging you for doing that. And as well, just very quickly, 50 Shades of Grey has been like disavowed by multiple sexologists as being a really poor representation of BDSM and not good sex practice in general. Anyway, so as Afi mentioned, is it about real quick, yeah.
Okay, yes, it is put forward in the media, it is dramatized and all the rest of it. It's something well, and people aren't.
Yeah, of course. So that's why we want sex positive to go further. We need more education on this to realise that this is not normal and it isn't something we should be subscribing to, and that we should be challenging these ideas. So as Afi mentioned, I'm going to be talking a bit about how awful sex ed is, basically, with regards to LGBTQ plus issues. I already kind of briefly touched on asexuality, but sex positivity in general, we believe, is filling in gaps that society creates. So this is especially true for disenfranchised groups such as the LGBTQ plus community. And we believe that a greater emphasis on sexual education, discussing the different issues that the community faces with regards to sex, will not only enrich the education of non-LGBT members of the community, but it will help the LGBT members of society feel more enfranchised, valued, and at the end of the day, it's just legitimising their sexuality in society on the whole. So basically what we're saying isn't that a greater influence of sex positivity is going to end homophobia, nothing like that, transphobia, nothing like that, but it's making a start. Like, we're already moving forward. This is how sex positivity has taken us so far. We can take it further, we can do more. Just real quickly on consent. So, consent is a massive part of sex positivity, because if it's not consensual, sex positivity does not condone it. Like, that is not the point of sex positivity. Consent is, as I'm hopefully sure everybody in here knows, cannot be with children can consent, cannot be with animals can consent, between two consenting adults who understand each other's desires, who are willing to talk, and we understand that this doesn't happen enough, and that's why sex positivity needs to go further. That's the whole point of this argument. We see so many cases of sexual assault at the highest forms of government, and not much is being, nothing being done about it. Sorry, my complete spectrum now, my notes are all over the place. If you want to know
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, consent, of course, and indeed, these are sound ideas, but in practice, however, especially with these more complex relationships, and indeed with the aforementioned submissive relationship, it's much more difficult to define consent. It's much more difficult to define the person's headspace, where they are, is that what they want to do, maybe they have the verbally consent, but is that an accurate representation of what they really feel? It's a grey area, it's very complex, but I don't think that it's been tackled enough. I think pushing forward on these extraordinary sexual sort of relationships without having put this done is irresponsible.
Yeah, so I think the way that I would answer that is by saying that is only the way it is now because what we're doing currently isn't enough. And by pushing sex positivity, that's not just going to make the problem worse because we're not dealing with it. Sex positivity is dealing with it because it's about open dialogues and communication, it's about consent, which I do understand can be a very grey area, especially when you're looking at those dominant submissive relationships and dynamics. But if it's done properly and not through like 50 Shades of Grey, influence media, then we can see it working, and that's what we need to push forward. That's what sex positivity is trying to get to. Okay. To conclude really quickly, the society that we're in currently is repressive in so many ways in regards to sex. It's heteronormative. We're not getting a well-rounded sexual education for all different genders and sexualities. So there's this big misunderstanding, and placing emphasis on sex positivity, as I said earlier, it's not going to be making people go at it like rabbits. Like, that is not the point at all. It's just going to try and make sex a bit better and recognise that, yeah, sex is messy and scary and, you know, like, physically a bit dirty, but it can still be all those things and enjoyable. Like, we just need to take all the stigmas away from it. We can do this through education, through talking about things, through having well-established consent taught from a young age, and it won't be inappropriate. But proposition is suggesting that this society is okay how it is by saying sex positivity has gone too far. And we as the opposition don't stand for that. Because sex positivity is beneficial to society on the whole. It benefits disenfranchised members of the community by creating an open dialogue between groups in society, by promoting safe, enjoyable sex between anybody. And put simply, sex positivity is for everyone. It is non-exclusive, non-binary, and holds space for anybody who wishes to embody it. Thank you very much. Sorry for that.
And if we could, again, get another round of applause for Miss Montgomery's. Right, and now please welcome up, speaking third and finally for the proposition, Miss Ciara Swale.
Right, so first of all, what I'm going to say is, you stole my joke. I was going to do the old salt and pepper. I was going to sing it and everything. It was going to be great.
Well, you should have been on first entry, shouldn't you?
I don't know. Anyway. But first thing I'm going to say is, yes, we need more sex education and things like that. But what sex positivity has created is a culture where it is expected that you should be okay with sex, that you should be able and feel comfortable with having sex, whatever. That's great, but it creates an expectation, and that's where it gets a bit problematic, because I think we can all relate to the fact that in today's society, the majority of people don't feel comfortable being virgins anymore. That by a certain age, they feel a ticking time clock that's like, oh God, I'm a virgin, I need to get rid of this, as if it's a ticking time bomb that needs to be chucked on to the next person. I have heard my male friends literally say phrases such as, I was so relieved when I lost it. I was so glad that I lost it. And that's a problem. And yes, sex positivity may go for anyone, I don't know.
So that's like because people want to have sex. It's not just that they don't want to be virgins, it's that they, do you know what I mean? It's a pleasurable thing to other people, it's not good.
No, but that's the thing. It's because sex is good and all that work, but at the same time, I have heard people who have said they have felt pressured to do it by a certain age or things like that. And sex positivity doesn't really address this or anything that I've heard from it. And also, sex positivity, again, it says better education, but it doesn't really talk, like you said, oh yes, people who don't find it physically pleasurable. But again, that's not being talked about. And that's the problem. Even in sex positivity movements, I've had no mention of people who physically cannot have it through various conditions such as vaginismus, vaginosis, the condition with the penis, I can't remember the name. But pretty much, that is not being addressed. And what ends up happening is we create a society where it is expected that to be normal, you should be able to have sex. So basically what happens is, we get there, and I've lost my train of thought. But pretty much, what ends up happening is they feel sad, because with sex positivity, it seems as if everyone's having sex, everyone's doing this, and AKAs are not. But that's what ends up happening, and this can lead to bad feelings of self-worth, this can lead to self-esteem issues, and this basically leads to problems with their mental health. And now, I'm going to move on to my second point, which is something that we have addressed. Sex is everywhere. You cannot avoid it.
Oh dear.
No, but it is everywhere. You can't avoid it. It's in advertising, it's in children's programs, it's everywhere. And go for it.
Well, maybe that is because it's one of the most common things in nature. Like, it's no coincidence that it's everywhere because we see it and we have seen it historically for thousands of years across many species.
I completely agree, but what the problem happens is when it comes to children, and that's something I'm going to address later on in my speech. The fact that literally, if you go, on Disney Channel, you see Nicki Minaj shaking her rump everywhere, and the fact that basically if you go into Victoria Square, you see lingerie models pretty much everywhere, and that's where it becomes a problem because you can't really protect children against this anymore. Like you can pretend that you can protect them. You can go, right, okay, let's put parental stuff on this phone, they won't be able to get at it. A prime example of this is the Kids app on YouTube. Now that was supposed to be a brilliant app that basically meant kids cannot watch anything that is inappropriate, and guess what happened? They did. A lot of it. There was various weird videos with Elsa and Spider-Man that I will not get into. Go, Russell.
Very funny. You appear to be acting as though we were ever able to protect children from this kind of thing. It's been historically the case that children from a very early age, from like the age of 11 plus, are learning about this kind of stuff. And is it not better to learn about it in a controlled environment as opposed to a
Yes, but that's what I mean. I personally believe sex education great, but sex positivity is creating a society where it is everywhere. And that's what is ending up happening. They're going to basically sources that they shouldn't be relying on. Like for example, as my colleague mentioned, the term with alcohol and addiction and things like that. And the fact that literally there are people nowadays who get addicted to porn at the age of 10, and there are people who go through this and get addicted to it, and the fact that there are literally 10-year-olds at this moment in time who are on the sex offenders register. And I'm not joking about that. That is a problem. We cannot pretend that oh yeah, because sex is everywhere now, it doesn't have an impact or anything like that. Because at the minute, there are 10-year-olds on the sex offenders register. Like for example, there was a story of an autistic boy. He was underage, and pretty much he pretty much went, oh great, and he doesn't understand stuff, so he repeats it. So what ended up happening was he repeated stuff that he saw in porn. He basically ended up repeating stuff that he saw in porn and ended up on the sex offenders register. And that's the thing, you can't, no thank you. And that's what I mean, you cannot protect people against this anymore. And also what I'm going to address with Tinder is the fact that, yes, it can have great relationships, but what I'm going to ask you is, how many strange, odd messages did you receive before finding that special someone? Because sex positivity basically creates a culture where you should be able to say whatever you want. And sometimes these people take it out of context and basically go, oh, I can say whatever I want. But yes, that's basically our argument. Sex positivity has gone too far because everywhere you cannot avoid it. And basically we need to think of the consequences. And that is why I urge everyone to vote for the proposition. Thank you very much.
Rightio, and now please welcome closing for the opposition and Vienna Hall, Miss Leanne Thorpe.
Okay, so let's go. I just wanted to readdress what we're talking about. So to me, sex positivity is just, it's not particularly sexy, I'm not gonna lie. It's education in terms of what goes in which slots, what can go in what slots. It's that kind of idea. I'm kind of not really understanding the argument that, sex positivity means more sex. It doesn't. All sex positivity all it means is that you know what you're doing when you do it, and it's more open. There's no secrecy behind it, and so that's our point. Just to remind everyone, sex positivity isn't about having sex. It's about knowing the differences in what's normal and what's not, and what's healthy and what's not. Not if sex is there or to encourage more sex. So that's our point. So again, sex education is not great, can be great, and sex ed will improve a lot of the issues brought up by the proposition.
On that point?
Not yet. For example, I'm trying to think of something I forgot. There's more teachings of asexuality and more teachings of people who can't have sex. Simply I reckon, by teenage boys knowing that exists, I think that's going to improve society a little bit. So making less fun of people who struggle to orgasm, that's going to make people a bit less ashamed of not being able to orgasm. It's just by normalising things, that's what we're trying to do. Because sex is far too private at the moment, I think. And it's normal, and everyone has it, or would like to have it. So, I'm going to move on to my argument, because I think I've run out of thoughts. Go on.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, I think we just need to bring this into motion here. So basically with the proposition, we propose the motion. What we propose is this. Sex positivity has gone too far, and we define too far in areas where it's causing unhealthy and negative ramifications. We're not talking about education. We're not talking about the positives that you've been largely talking about. That's not where it's gone too far. We're proposing the motion on where it's gone too far. That's not being addressed.
So our argument is saying that through education, your issue is fixed up. So by talking about it, all the things that come up, we will basically alleviate the issue. But that's another point I remembered. Thank you for that. So the whole issue about child sex offenders and stuff like that, I kind of used to believe that talking about sex is going to do anything. If people are kind of that way inclined, that's just, I think that's what happens. Sorry. Alright, I'm going to move on to the next remaining point. So, Jessica mentioned the education side, and Olivia has spoken about how important learning sexuality is, so I'm going to talk about bodies. Knowing more about how your body works can be pretty fun. Having great sex is always a good thing, and knowing your own body and having more knowledge about your partners means sex can be fun, exciting, and gives rewards, such as orgasms, many health benefits, stress-free, better sleep, lowering the risk of heart disease, many more. This is very important, so especially if you've had an experience, there's a lot of anxiety building up. Masturbating for the first time, or the first time with your partner, This anxiety will be eased if there's more discussion on how bodies work and what makes us tick. Getting rid of this yes.
But surely going to the gym and eating healthier lowers heart disease. Surely having sex is an exclusive to those things. And there are safer ways to do it.
That's well, yeah, but there's surely more things to combat an illness is better than doing one thing. Just do two things rather than doing one thing. Is that what? No, okay. Right, okay. So getting rid of this unpredictability and doubting ourselves before, during and after the act makes it a much better experience. If we're more open about what we like during sex activity, we're less secretive of worrying if you're doing it wrong. This takes the pressure off and just makes you feel a bit better emotionally. If you know what you like and you can know what they like, it should be a good experience. To me, sex positivity also means body positivity. It means everyone's right to dress how they like and show and don't show what they like. So, equality of nipples is a thing, and it hasn't isn't there yet, so censorship. So it should be free the female nipple, I think. And then also short skirts and underwear as outerwear. That also carries like a wider value in terms of freedom of expression. In many countries, the oppression of what people, especially women, wear has gone on long enough. I can discount the claim that sex positivity has gone too far, clearly more of it is moving across the world. Where it's human traffickers forcing children into sexual clothing, or the prosecution of Muslim models in Muslim ruled countries not wearing a burqa, freedom to express yourself through your body needs to be protected. And to those who say it isn't appropriate all the time to wear whatever you want, such as lingerie models in shops, I feel like the world's going to change. Because we went from full-length Victorian gowns to tights being had to be worn with skirts, and then tattoos are now really showing the world of work. Social standards might keep boobs and bras for now, but honestly, give us a few decades and who knows what the new norm is. That's not to say exposing yourself is mandatory or it is the new normal. Quite frankly, I come to a less hate the idea of short skirts or not showing up with a short skirt. The point I'm trying to make is that showing your body is just one way to show freedom, and more body positivity needs to keep doing you. Confidence and right using it of our bodies, if you like what we see, we're happier. So body positivity ultimately includes expanding our perception of what a normal body is. I will advocate more models in my size and above, again, normalising the experience of bodies and sex, and stop shaming people who want to wear revealing clothing and letting skin spills. Being positive in your own skin is healthy. I'm not advocating obesity, just broadening the idea of what's attractive. So it's time to move on to genitalia. So more sex positivity in sex ed brings more of an awareness of what normal genitalia looks like, and so it stops people looking at porn thinking, oh, this is normal, because it really isn't. So this means, to me, this means more nudity, but not necessarily sexual activity. It just means showing your body. In TV shows and films and broader society as well as formal education. It stopped the worrying that your vagina's wrong, or your penis is too big. That will stop. It'll be in to the whole called penis, you know. Just know you have a healthy genitalia and be happy with it. So the point I'm trying to make is that sex positivity is all about understanding and accepting yourself, and accepting and empathizing with others. We're not encouraging you to take any action or do anything immoral. It's just so you know when, just so you know more at when and if you decide to act. Have fun, stay safe, and vote for your position.
And if I could again ask for another round of applause for one more time for all of our brilliant speakers this evening. Because they know that I'm here presidenting every week, sometimes my traditionalist Catholic parents very often listen in the live stream. They get a very aghast sounding phone call. Right, so it now is time, as it always is, for a few rounds of questions, and we actually have a surprising amount of time left, so we'll have perhaps time for loads of questions. So, we'll go firstly to if there are any questions in the room for the proposition, that is this side of the house. I'll go to Miss Donovan.
I'd like to address the point that Ms. Wheel made about the concept of virginity, which is something that the sex positive movement would really comment against, that this idea that virginity is a concept, is a tangible thing, which it's not, and sex positivity, the movement, would really teach people against that stigma and improve people's image and thoughts surrounding this concept.
Oh no, you'll be getting a gas.
They read my dissertation, they know.
The thing is, yes, I completely agree. The sex positivity movement has goes like, oh yes, virginity isn't a concept, whatever. The thing is, it is creating a society where people think everyone is having sex and everyone is doing stuff because they're getting, condoms thrown at them left, right, and center. But like, that's what but they may intend for that to be the case, but in reality that comes across quite different. That comes across as like, everyone's having sex and I'm left out.
Anyone from the opposition to respond to that? Don't have to, but...
we think sex positive, again, isn't about having sex, so I think by putting a condom in someone's hand, I don't think makes any difference whether or not you want to have sex or not. If you want to have sex, you're going to have it, and that's before any kind of education to us. That's more to do with hormones and to their society as well. So the actual movement itself makes no difference on you know sex.
And we'll go now to any questions for the opposition. Mr. Nairn.
Alright, so I do like the core of what you're saying as a start. But the thing that I have reservations regarding your whole argument is I have found myself in a very unfortunate circumstance multiple times throughout my life where people who I know have, using this sort of justification, found it necessary to parade their various fetishes in front of me in various different environments, and any attempt to question them in this regard would be viewed as kink shaming or in some way not accepting them for what they are. And given your side has talked about this idea of more publicly acceptable views on this kind of thing, I want to know whether or not you think this is something that's my fault for my inherently Jewish nature, or something that you think is a problem with your movement here.
Opposition gets going first.
Yeah. Okay. I can completely see the whole issue of kink shaming. On one hand, I do think everybody has a right to talk about their sexual preferences. You have the right to not want to not, and to disagree with theirs. We didn't really touch very much on kink shaming or kinks in general, and I think that's because it's such a grey area with how we class them and whether we think they're safe or not, and what we class as safe or not, because what some people get pleasure from might outwardly not look safe, but again it depends on the conditions that they're doing them in. It is a tricky one to talk about because you both you and the people that create their fetishes or whatever both have a right to either want to or not to share them or not to, and not want to hear it. But I think again we're about promoting an open dialogue, so you should be comfortable in telling people that you don't want to hear it, you don't want to talk about it, and I think that is something that sex positivity is trying to do as well, getting people to just talk about their opinions ultimately.
Does anyone from the proposition wish to respond?
Well, the opposition calls Claire is the one to touch on the whole entire point. To be honest with you, there is a difference between public and private space. There's a difference between public and private space. I do think it's something you should get private. I think for the reason that some people want to see you get flash and yes, too positive. Anyway, we don't want to see that. We have a right to not see that. So I think yes, Russell, I do have to your position. First time I've ever heard that. But yes, I mean, just want to touch on something else you said, Russell. I just want to clarify very quickly. It's all about controlled environment. Well, what we're actually proposing is a controlled environment. I'm not saying we can't have the education. This is all good. This is all sex positivity. This is good. None of this has gone too far. None of that was what we said was going too far. Is this, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's shoving people's faces. People want to see it. Because it's shoving people's faces, it's difficult to control and see. Especially in a society that's much more technologically advanced, mobile phones, things like that, social networks. And with that comes new pressures. For instance, if you start seeing all your friends all of a sudden sharing things, say, I'm going to go to this event, whatever else. I'm going to go to this event or something like that there, and but you feel the pressure to do that. That's what it means by version. And I disagree with the fact that version not being constantly, I'm not saying, I guess that's a word to find out. You know what I mean? That's what words do, but yeah.
There was a man walking about the SU last year, and he was wearing a very particular costume. Somebody in the room might be familiar with him, and he was trying to give me some leaflets. We'll move on to now if there are any abstaining points on the motion. These are points that are not directed towards either side, things you didn't think were brought up appropriately in the debate. If there are any of those in the room, no. Ms. Craddock, yes.
So I think both sides have tried to touch upon but haven't really discussed the idea of commercialisation around the sex positive movement. To the point where we can have women dancing literally topless in videos with two men in suits looking on while they sing a song that's borderline about rape. But women can't breastfeed in public transport because that upsets them because there are boobs or it upsets people in general. So for both sides please discuss where they stand on that and how they plan to combat that.
Go to the proposition.
Okay.
Let's have a respond first.
Yeah, fantastic point. I think yes, it should be developed more actually. Yeah, democratization is the cheapening of sex, cheapening of people, and that's what I try to teach them actually. It's the idea that it is objectification of other human beings, they're human beings. Emotions, an actual stream of consciousness that makes them a person. You know, when you have like some copies of stuff here, tell that story. You know, it does cheapen the experience. It does undermine, I think, what the movement's trying to achieve. You know what I mean? I think what sex positivity is trying to achieve is that you have a certain dialogue. You start looking at people, but empathizing in some new way. But functionally, that's not happening. Functionally, what is actually happening is that it's just cheap, pure carnal pleasure. There's no real emotion behind it. It's like, yes, we should talk about this, talk about that, for example. It seems that I'm talking about what was the consequence.
And the other person wish to respond.
Yeah, towards Peter's point. So yeah, positivity, breastfeeding should be more common, yeah. In terms of the whole degradation of women's bodies in particular, the kind of hope that's exploited as well is by normalising bodies themselves, is that hopefully men and other people won't treat women's bodies as just something to look at. It's by understanding others, accepting others, you look at a body and think that that's a person. So that is what part of the movement is.
And I'll make my own abstaining point and say there was a Louis Theroux documentary that came out a couple of days ago about this very subject and presented some very interesting arguments for either side of this, and I recommend everyone in the room check it out. We'll now wrap right back around to if there are any questions for the proposition. Yes, Mr. Graham.
So for me personally, for the opposition, sex positivity is all about education. From primary school and secondary school, we seem to have a still of education. So to ensure that we do learn about consent especially, and we learn about to normalise sex and to ensure that people are using protection or using contraception. If you're not having sex with who you are having sex with, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter what sexuality or what gender you choose. And I think that's maybe something that you have missed, that you are looking at the negative effect. But actually, sex positivity is pushing forward how much we need education, specifically in this country, and that we can't neglect that, and I think music can just ignore that, to be honest.
Anyone from the proposition wish to respond?
Right then. To be honest, well, we have focused on the negative, but that's part of it, and I think it's part of it that's not being focused on. That's kind of what we're talking about. That's where we mean. That's why we try to find it so particularly. There's long lines of this is where it's gone too far, and this is what we mean by too far, and that means that we're in a position to be able to say, well, here's a solution. You know, I mean, we're not saying all aspects of the movement are wrong or whatever else. It's not about demonising sex positivity. As I said, segment the meaning in a little bit in certain areas, but sex positivity, not seeing sex negativity. really want to make that clear. And I'm sorry if we didn't. But yeah, I feel like it's education, correct? Yeah, fantastic. And Northern Ireland is hyper-religious. We know that's incredibly conservative. We don't even have the ability to have gay marriages. Then there's clearly a lot to work on here. That said, I don't think, the hypersexualization of media is sex this, sex good, in a way that is being commercialized. It's everywhere. It's impressively there. Especially if you're a student, because it is a big thing, I don't think, being a student. You don't need to get so fair enough, I think that's positive. If people say, here's protection, that's a good idea, I hope you all do. But the situation is this, is that, if you're someone who's just very insecure about it, and many people can be, for no other reason than this is part of their maturity and development. And you're starting to hear it's a little condos here, yeah, this is what you should be doing right now. A man's walking up dressed as a giant cheese. Leave it alone. But yeah, I think it's just about drawing lines. I think that's what we mean by it's gone too far. I think it's gone too far. A little bit, keep it within its context, and yeah.
And from the opposition, Mr. Response to that point.
Yes, I think that is a very good point. It is so important for people, for young people especially, primary school and primary, to have that sort of information, especially with a lot of the cases that we're having at the moment. The recent case that went to trial there up in Belfast, and of course consent is a very grey area, and you know what? Yes, people are running about as vaginas and penises, and it's a mad world. But you know what? It does bring across a point, and I met this guy last year, but he did have little leaflets explaining a lot about how sex can be had and what consent actually is, and really clearing that up. And I think kids, I'm not saying from a young age we need to specifically tell kids, this is how this works and this is sex and blah blah blah. But we need to sort of bring kids into that and normalise it, and not make people feel ashamed, we can't talk about sex. The whole point of the sex positivity movement is regardless of whether you are afraid to talk about it or you're not too confident in talking about it and whatever, it's just making sure that information there is accessible, and that if you want to speak to someone about it, absolutely, you can go ahead and speak to someone about it, because it's so important that we educate people.
And now if there are any questions in the room for the opposition. Mr. Gilmore.
So the opposition has said all night that sex positivity is for everyone. And you quite rightly claimed that children can't consent. But I believe an inevitable consequence of the sex positivity movement is the sexualization of children themselves. Do you believe this is a consequence necessarily? And do you believe that lines are being blurred in regards to the sexualization of children?
And from the opposition with response.
Okay, so one thing that I'd like to just really quickly touch on with what children say, as much as I don't agree with it, the whole point is normalizing bodies, because we have bodies, we see one every single time we look in the mirror. It's not like kids don't know what boobs are. Children are breastfed the majority of the time, so that's just something that I don't relate to that. Do we think it's a consequence that children are going to be over-sexualized? I think without sex positivity and a discussion of what is acceptable and isn't, will lead to the over-sexualization of children. But I also think that's to do with a capitalist society on the whole, and the media as well, which we're kind of suggesting that through these ideas of education and discussion, society will improve. Hopefully children won't be over-sexualized, but they'll understand what sex is, what their body is, without them being viewed as sexual objects, because that's what sexualization is. They're being viewed as sexual objects, which are not, because they can't consent, they're kids. So we're not saying that this is going to lead to kids being viewed as sexual objects, but hopefully with this education, people won't view children as sexual objects, and children have a better understanding of their own sexuality and their own being.
Any problems with response?
Yeah, there is a problem with we need to educate kids, but the problem here is when do we start educating them? Because seemingly from the age of 1, from the age of whatever, they are seeing sex everywhere, and that is a problem. And the thing about it is that I do agree with the sexualization of children. I think that's going a bit too far. But I do believe that with kids seeing this stuff, we've seen all this stuff, they think, oh, that's what adults do. I'll do it like that as well. And that has led to instances where, as I said, there are 10-year-olds who are sex offenders because they think that's how relationships work. And they've seen, sex everywhere, and they think this is normal, this is what happens, and then that's a consequence of it.
In the interest of time, I'm going to ask that everyone who has questions remaining that we all keep our questions and answers brief. Now moving to any abstaining points in the room. Mr. Hummel.
Just something that was about you sort of talking about the possibility and how it could relate to models and then with like broader in terms of like if we have more bodies, then there's less sort of pleasure in that assessment. I would say like, do you not think with stuff like that you're just adapting something that's inherently like the modelling industry is inherently objectifying whoever it is, like they're there to look beautiful. So you're just replacing one type of beautiful for a different type of beautiful. There's nothing else to that person. They're just piece of beautiful. Like, do you know what I mean? But you also have like a broadening of like it's more acceptable for women to watch porn and like that sort of thing. With like women being much more open about their sexual desires and porn, but actually that's porn's still a bad thing. And sexual positivity can sometimes broaden out into just basically adapting or negative forms to
Wasn't really abstaining. Opposition to respond first.
So yeah, different bodies. It depends how sexuality comes out in the end. Like my input is that bodies become less sexual because everyone's body is more open. So basically, when you see more boobs, you normalise boobs. Therefore, boobs are not that point anymore. That's that point. And then more was the second. I don't know that one.
Yeah, you just like changing it to a negative thing to another negative thing.
Yeah.
So like having a larger woman doesn't make it less objectifying. It's just you objectifying a larger woman as well as a woman.
Yeah, but doesn't everyone objectify? I feel like women objectify men.
Yeah, but that's
There's no bad
It's-
people, alright?
I don't know how to answer it. I guess yeah, it's hopefully it will show the person behind the body. And accepting more bodies means that we understand the story more, and hopefully nowadays models become more like not just bodies anymore, more people. That kind of movement would help. No, sorry, I was a bit sidetracked.
Does anyone from the proposition want to respond?
Yeah, so it has stuff. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but I think, right, the same thing said at sex positivity was not all these things. Certain motion says gone too far. What does that mean? Regulation. It means that we're able to control what you see, control, okay, to what extent that I, as a human being, be so, and obviously do that. So, I mean, there can be an abuse, in short. And we think that, and to bring back to the motion still a bit, right, is that sex positivity has known as a movement. Well, yes, that may be a part of it as well, but I mean, a movement also has to take account of the tools that are there, also has to take account of the effects that it has. That is on the responsibility of the movement, the consequences it does. That makes sense. And you have to take account of that. Part of not taking account of that is why we think it's gone too far. In terms of moving the private space and the public space, too much in the public space where people
And I'll explain this to children as well, because this was brought up actually. And I'll try and as brief as possible. But yes, sexualization of children and all the rest of it, it's not just about them being sexually about other people. It's how they themselves, in their context, in their mind, view themselves and view other people. And I think what you see in OIS and youth work is that that's the cool thing to do, that's the right thing to do, but that's how you have to go about doing things. You know, I don't think that's positive. I don't think it gives a healthy view of yourself. I don't think it gives a healthy view of other people. I think we really need to sit down and consider this, and we're not considering it because it's unfashionable. It's unfashionable to say, well, no, this woman probably shouldn't be, or this man even probably shouldn't be sort of about, you know, in a jockstrap in front of TV. He should be proud. I don't think there's an element of that, but I mean, it's also in the context of where we're seeing this. You know what I mean? And ultimately, I think, in a word, what our motion really is regulation. But we get yeah, it is. It is. But that's why these things work. It's fashion. It's a trend. They also, in this body type, go back in Renaissance, you know, it was showing people, you know, who seem to be wealthy and all the rest of it. They all see this as sexy. Now it's people who look like pipe cleaners. You know, it just comes in and goes. So.
Okay. Now, we're going to take one more round. I'm limiting you to 30-second questions, 30-second answers. I will be timing you. So, wrapping back around to the proposition. Yes, you get your name from the minute, sorry.
Eddie from you said something about sex in its context. What do you think sex is in its context? Are you creating a barrier? Are you creating a box where sex should be?
Proposition to respond.
It's a good one. Functionally, yeah. You know, we are trying to decide because people need boundaries. People need to know where things begin and where things end. You know, and to see if things are acceptable or not, you know what I mean? And this, of course, has to be united, and it is a very dangerous part. But yeah, it is. We're kind of saying, okay, to what extent are we as a society going to say, okay, well, this is as far as we want to take this. I think that there is a difference, and I do think we mentioned this in so we will do it now. The difference between public space and private space. You know what I mean? What people do in private space. Yeah, that's a cultural thing. It's not necessarily just for this culture, it's all around the world. We all have these different boundaries. But I think we have to be respectful of these boundaries, which I don't think sex positivity is doing adequately. And that's where it's going for. It's on the field.
Opposition to respond to that, if you wish to. Or I can move on, don't have to.
Could you really quickly just say it was about sex in its context, and it was a bit about censorship as well. You know, what is sex, and when do we say it's too far?
Don't have to respond, you don't want it. Yeah, just pass on. Okay. Make my job easy. Questions for the opposition. Can't break it, let her hand up for ages.
Nepotism.
There's a couple of authors, Ariel Levy and Susan or something, have questioned this idea that the flexibility and availability of women is not liberation, but is in fact a form of new sexism.
Respond. You don't have to, again.
To clarify the idea that women should be housewives and mothers is one form of what women should be, but now we're expecting women to be sexually liberated at all times. And those are two forms of putting women into boxes, so instead of it being liberated, it is a new form of sexism.
Well, what was I say? So basically, personally, the form of sex positivity movement, be whatever you want to be. Like if you want to be parents, that's fine. If you want to be sexually liberated, that is okay as well. But if you just want to have unpaid real sex, that is also okay. That was very bad. I'm sorry. I'm limited to 30 seconds. I'm under pressure.
The proposition was to respond.
Hey, that's basically what I was talking about in my speech, the thing with the expectation where very much the sex positivity creates culture where very much, you should be open to talk about your things and you should be open to talk about this. But it ends up happening in reality that women feel pressured to, if they have a boyfriend, for example, if the boyfriend is into something, a bit on board, the woman basically, because she thinks, right, this should be normal, I should be able to do this sexually and maybe I'll get into it. That's the problem where they pretty much, and I completely agree, they are putting Junior box of, we see pop stars, Nicki Minaj, there's a song about box every other week, and that is a problem.
Okay, and finally I'll take one more abstaining point if there is one. Mr. Glasgow.
So, Aristotelian virtue ethics. There are four. One of them is temperance. In practical modern language, this is moderation. Everything in moderation is taken to be generally a good thing to yourselves. Why so I'm asking the both of you, to yourselves, why should we listen to this wisdom from 2,000 years ago? It's stupid. Things in excess are good, they are good. You have to prove why they aren't good to yourselves. Why should we abandon the common wisdom of society? Why should we abandon the wisdom of the philosopher? Why should we not adhere to the societal adage that things in moderation are good and things in excess are bad? Mr.
This time to the proposition to respond first.
Why excess is bad? Because you've kind of addicted to it. A classic example of that is sex addiction. Since porn and stuff like that is very regularly available now, there are people out there who are teenagers who watch it 2 to 3 times a day, and it gets to the point where it controls their lives. And with the thing in excess again, too many people are being exposed to it that shouldn't be exposed to it, and that's why the excess is bad.
Exactly 30. Opposition to respond.
Just super quickly, we're not saying people should be having excessive amounts of sex.
That's what they propose, so you have to listen to them.
Yeah.
Silence.
A point of clarification.
Actually.
A point of clarification. Well, I proposed this, so I'll tackle this a little bit. Right, so we're not saying necessarily sex in excess.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily saying sex in excess, although this would certainly be inclusive of that, because that would be not necessarily, so the point is, not necessarily excess sex, but certainly in excess of the movement of where it's gone into and what it's going to do, and negative ramifications of that. We said in media, we said in terms of the types of sex and the lack of scrutiny of these types of sex, that consent is hardly a grey area, but there are people who judging. Well, you should just be free, which inherently says, this is good, because you got consent, but it's great. We can't necessarily be about that. We need to look at that. We need to start a bit more.
Back to the opposition to respond to the original question. No,
it's clarifying.
Yeah, it's clarifying.
It's his question about the Aristotelian virtue ethics.
Excess.
Yeah, excess.
What we meant by excess. So in essence, now it's only to say, well, these are not excessive. Or not. It's up to you. Just offer it first.
We're just a bit confused.
Okay, right, these.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, sorry.
Are you okay?
Mentally, I'm on another.
It's we're getting on in the time anyway. So we shall now move to a vote. So please search around for your membership card. If you're not a member, I unfortunately cannot count your vote. That's just the way it is. So look around for your membership cards and get ready to raise. The motion is, this House believes sex positivity has gone too far. This is our vote on speakerability. It is not on what your opinions on the motion are. It is which side you think gave the more convincing speeches, the better delivered speeches, and the better delivered arguments. So, if you would like to vote in favour of the proposition, please raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
to vote in favour of the opposition, please raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
And if you don't have your card with you, and I know you remember, you can still raise your hand, and I'll probably be able to count you. Should have said that earlier, but if you wish to vote abstaining, that you believe both sides were equally good or terrible, please raise your hands and say meh. Meh. Alright, the votes are in. And I will say that this has been a very entertaining debate, and thanks again to all the speakers. It's been a good time enough. So, Mr. Bradley, read me back the vote, please.
The vote that was held on this debate read 16 ayes, 21 nays, and 13 abstentions.
The nays have it, the nays have it. Right, so a few announcements to make before you all get out of your seat. We will, as always, be going to Lavery's bar. We'll be out the back bit. Go there and join us for a wee pint and a chat, or whatever it is that you like to do. So, hopefully not too much. As well as that, if we brought some extra chairs in here, they locked the Lanyon building up fairly soon after 9, so we need to get those out of here fairly quickly. So if you're... Oh yes, I forgot about you as well, sorry.
So I'm part of the Edit magazine, which is a career magazine. It's just a free magazine to read. If you could give us a like and a follow on Facebook, so that's where you can get the issue. Have a read. You are featured, the status featured. So yeah, just for a little read. Yeah. So at the Edit THB, like us. Yes.
Aside from that, if you wish to speak out competitive debating, speak to Tara, Jake Kieran, you have a very handsome face.